The US of A is the serial killer capital of the world. From an Alaskan who hunted humans for sport to the killer clown from Illinois that murdered dozens. But who was the worst killer from each state? And which state had the worst killer of all? Number 50, Wyoming. Population 580,000. Homicide rate 2.6 per 100,000 people. Wyoming has the lowest population in the United States, but that doesn't mean it has the fewest serial killers. With 32 cases over nearly 30 years. It's also home to one of the creepiest, Rodney Alcala, aka the dating game killer. Yes, he appeared on a TV show in the middle of the killing spree. Alcala murdered at least 9 people and maybe as many as 130. His thing? Strangling victims, letting them come to, and then doing it all over again. Talk about a nightmare date. Number 49, Vermont. Population 650,000. Homicide rate 3.4. Vermont may be famous for its peaceful vibes, but it also had Gary Lee Schaefer. Between 1979 and 1983, he kidnapped and murdered 3 young girls. He lured them into his car, did horrific things, and left their bodies behind. Vermont's got its dark side too. Number 48, North Dakota. Population 780,000. Homicide rate 3.5. North Dakota doesn't have a huge serial killer history, but it's where we find Eugene Butler, the Great Plains Butcher. Back in the 1900s, Butler killed 6 men and buried their bodies under his house. His crimes weren't discovered until years after he died in an insane asylum. Number 47, South Dakota. Population 920,000. Homicide rate 6.9. Congratulations, South Dakota, you got the lowest number of serial killers in the entire country, with just 10 recorded between 1992 and 2019. The odds of running into a serial killer here are super low, but that didn't stop Robert Leroy Anderson, also known as the duct tape killer, from making headlines in the mid-90s. Anderson, being the total creep he was, kidnapped and tortured 2 women before ending their lives. He was sentenced to death but never made it to the execution. He was found dead in his cell before they could carry it out. Number 46, Delaware. Population 1,030,000. Homicide rate 7. Delaware's claim to serial killer infamy is Stephen Brian Pennell, the Route 40 killer. Between 1987 and 1988, Pennell picked up women along Route 40, tortured them in his car, and beat them to death with a hammer. He was executed in 1992. Number 45, Rhode Island. Population 1.1 million. Homicide rate 2. The smallest state in the U.S. gave us 25 serial killings from 1992 to 2019, and one incredibly unique killer, Craig Price, a man who claimed 4 lives while only a teenager back in the 1980s, making him the youngest serial killer in American history. But that didn't stop him from being one of the most brutal. One victim, 27-year-old Rebecca Spencer, was stabbed 58 times in her own home. He was only 13 years old. Price stabbed 39-year-old Joan Heaton 57 times in front of her 2 young daughters, whom he also murdered. He was only 15 when this happened. His attack was so frenzied that the blade broke off and was lodged in the 10-year-old girl's throat. Number 44, Montana. Population 1.15 million. Homicide rate 5.4. Here we see the numbers start to climb again. 47 serial killings from 1992 to 2019. The state's most infamous killer is Wayne Nathan Nance, aka the Missoula Mauler, who was posthumously connected to at least 6 different murder cases from 1974 to 1986. Nance often liked to invade the homes of his victims, immobilizing them and tormenting them for his own gratification before shooting them to death. However, he'd get a taste of his own medicine in the end. When he tried to murder his bosses, Doug and Kristen Wells, they were able to turn the tables on their would-be killer and murdered him instead. Couldn't have happened to a nicer guy. Next up is something really rare, a female serial killer. Number 43, Maine. Population 1.4 million. Homicide rate 2.6. Despite being the land of Stephen King, Maine only had 35 serial killings from 1992 to 2019. But if you head back to the bloody decade of 1884 to 1894, you'd find Mary Cowan, the Borgia of Maine, and her 6 unfortunate victims, all of them her immediate family members. She poisoned 2 of her husbands and 4 of her children before eventually being caught while trying to murder her 3rd husband. And you thought the dating game today was tough. Now let's take a look at one of the freakiest looking killers on our list. Number 42, New Hampshire. Population 1.4 million. Homicide rate 1.8. Despite only having a mercifully meager 14 serial killings from 1992 to 2019, New Hampshire gave us serial fraudster and murderer Terry Peter Rasmussen, also known as the Chameleon Killer. believed to have claimed over 5 victims on his killing spree from 1978 to 2002. Like Mary Cowan, many of his victims were lovers or his own child, who were tormented and murdered under one of Terry's countless aliases. His chameleonic nature allowed him to get away with his crimes for decades, and when push came to shove, they were only ever able to convict him of one of what were likely many killings. But our next killer was never convicted at all. Number 41. Hawaii. Population 1.45 million. Homicide rate 3. The beautiful land of Hawaii had only 13 serial killings from 1992 to 2019. But from 1985 to 1986, it also acted as the hunting ground for the Honolulu Strangler, an unidentified serial killer who murdered as many as 5 people. And you thought Mark Zuckerberg was the worst person in Hawaii. As the moniker suggests, the killer attacked his victims, bound them, abused them, and strangled them, often leaving their bodies with their hands tied behind their backs, and in one case wrapped in a tarp. For all we know, he could still be out there somewhere today. Now let's take a look at another terrifying female killer. Number 40. West Virginia. Population 1.77 million. Homicide rate 6.2. While these country roads may take you home to West Virginia, with 43 serial killings from 1992 to 2019, you might not leave alive, especially if you ran into Retta Mays, a classic angel of death serial killer who likely murdered over 8 elderly military veterans in 2017 and 2018. While working as a nursing assistant, she intentionally gave fatal doses of insulin to her patients. She was also obsessed with other female killers, searching them online and watching Netflix documentaries about other killer nurses. Who knows if an aspiring killer is watching this video right now? But there is a far more prolific monster on the way. Number 39. Idaho. Population 1.9 million. Homicide rate 2.7. Idaho's number of serial murders is roughly on par with West Virginia, with 45 serial killings from 1992 to 2019. One strange case is Thomas Eugene Creech, a killer who has been convicted of 5 murders, but has claimed as many as 42. The big question is, what is the truth? Creech claims to be a contract killer, to have committed murders for biker gangs, and to even have committed human sacrifices for satanic cults. The problem is, it's very likely that Creech is telling tall tales to pass the time in jail. Truth is, we may never know. The crimes of our next killer, however, are all too real. Number 38. Nebraska. Population 2 million. Homicide rate 3.7. Two things are true about Nebraska: there is plenty of corn, and there were 82 serial killings from 1992 to 2019. But the most infamous murder technically isn't a serial killer, he's a spree killer, and his crimes are so well known that they made it into Billy Joel's "We Didn't Start the Fire." Charles Starkweather took the lives of 11 victims during his killing spree from November 1957 to January 1958, aged 19 years old and accompanied by his 14-year-old girlfriend. Anyone who ran into them had a good chance of meeting their doom at the business end of Starkweather's Winchester Model 1906, his Stevens Model 59A, or his .38 revolver. But this next killer's crimes will truly turn your stomach. Number 37. New Mexico. Population 2.1 million. Homicide rate 14.5. Despite what you might have seen on Breaking Bad, New Mexico had only 72 serial killings from 1992 to 2019. But it also had one killer that makes Walter White look like Mr. Rogers: David Parker Ray, the Toy Box Killer, who was suspected to have murdered anywhere from 60 to 100 victims. But it's what he did to his victims before he killed them that makes David Parker Ray so monstrous. He tortured his victims in his own personal toy box, a cargo trailer he allegedly spent $100,000 on converting into a high-tech torture chamber, designed specifically to live out his most twisted and sadistic fantasies on his captives, including things we literally cannot describe here. He also eluded justice in the end, dying abruptly of a heart attack before he could be properly interrogated. The less we say about this one, the better. Number 36. Mississippi. Population 2.9 million. Homicide rate 20.7. This state had 98 serial killings from 1992 to 2019, and also gave us the despicable Donald Leroy Evans, a remorseless predator who preyed on the young and vulnerable in parks and rest areas, claiming anywhere from 3 to over 70 victims in total. Violent crime would also be the end of Evans' life after he was arrested and convicted when fellow prisoner Jimmy Mack stabbed him to death during a prison altercation. Live by the knife, die by the knife. But Evans looks downright chill compared to our next killer. Number 35. Kansas. Population 2.9 million. Homicide rate 5.8. Dorothy Gale's home state is responsible for 181 serial killings from 1992 to 2019, and also one of the most twisted, murderous masterminds in American criminal history, Dennis Rader, also known as BTK, his self-given nickname standing for Bind, Torture, Kill. Yeah, he's an edgy one. BTK murdered at least 12 people, with 2 more suspected, living up to his namesake with brutal home invasions that he pulled off with intimate knowledge of his victims' security systems. He even taunted the police about his murderous escapades, getting caught when he flew too close to the sun, and his correspondences led right back to him. Would you believe our next killer is even worse? Number 34. Arkansas. Population 3.1 million. Homicide rate 11.8. We're starting to see statewide murders climb, as Arkansas had 143 serial killings from 1992 to 2019. One particularly gruesome killer was Ronald Gene Simmons, not to be confused with the frontman of Kiss, a mass murderer who annihilated his entire family and several others, totaling 16 victims, over the course of 1 week in 1987. Simmons was a monster before he snapped and went on his killing spree. Having long carried a campaign of abuse against his family, he shot, drowned, and strangled all of his victims, achieving the dubious honor of being Arkansas's most prolific killer and the perpetrator of its worst mass shooting. Number 33. Nevada. Population 3.2 million. Homicide rate 7.8. This arid state is mainly known for gambling, aliens, and organized crime, so it's unsurprising that there were 117 serial killings from 1992 to 2019. It was also home to Carol Cole, a low-life killer believed to have claimed anywhere from 5 to 30 victims from 1947 to 1980. Somehow flying under the radar all that time, he destroyed life after life. Murder was in Cole's blood. He even committed his first killing at 8 years old, drowning another boy in Richmond, California. Number 32. Iowa. Population 3.2 million. Homicide rate 2.9. Iowa is one of the safer states where murder is concerned, with only 53 serial killings from 1992 to 2019. But back in 1961 and 62, the unfortunately named Gano Smith was wiping out his own family one by one until he racked up 6 murders to his name. But while Gano kept it in the family, our next killer went on the hunt. Number 31. Utah. Population 3.4 million. Homicide rate 2.2. A state known for its natural beauty and desert landscapes, was also the site of 86 serial killings from 1992 to 2019. One of the most violent and cruel killers in the state's history was Arthur Gary Bishop, responsible for the murders of 5 young boys for his own gratification. After a long history of predatory behavior toward boys, Bishop graduated to murder in 1979 when he lured young children to his apartment with false promises of free candy, money, or games, where the boys were tormented, mutilated, beaten with hammers, and drowned in the bathtub. And our next killer was even more prolific and methodical. Number 30. Connecticut. Population 3.6 million. Homicide rate 4.3. Connecticut isn't just known for its colonial history. It also had 134 serial killings from 1992 to 2019. Among its bevy of killers was Michael Bruce Ross, also known as the Roadside Strangler, and the Eggman, responsible for murdering at least 8 women from 1981 to 1984. He was a ruthless killer who gained deep personal pleasure from his crimes. He was caught and eventually put to death by lethal injection, a verdict that he himself supported, despite being a critic of the death penalty. His most famous moniker, the Roadside Strangler, didn't actually come from the time of his crimes. It was given to him by a British documentary about serial killers in 1995. But his numbers pale in comparison to our next killer. Number 29. Oklahoma. Population 4.1 million. Homicide rate 8.3. The stats once again jump with Oklahoma. 200 serial killings from 1992 to 2019. No slouch in pumping up the numbers was one Roger Dale Stafford, a vicious killer who claimed between 9 and 34 lives during his killing spree from 1974 to 1978. Stafford murdered the Lawrence family and 6 employees at a steak restaurant during a botched robbery. Though he never acknowledged guilt, he was connected to many other murders before his execution by lethal injection in 1995. But Stafford's bloodthirstiness was nothing compared to the cruelty of our next killer. Number 28. Oregon. Population 4.2 million. Homicide rate 5.1. Oregon is a beautiful state to visit, despite playing host to 175 serial killings from 1992 to 2019. One of its most infamous was Jerome Jerry Brudos, known alternatively as the Lust Killer and the Shoe Fetish Slayer. Care to hazard a guess as to why? Brutus abducted and killed 4 people across 1968 and 1969, strangling his victims in either his car, basement, or garage, after which he would dismember most of his victims, in some cases keeping the feet as souvenirs for later. Yes, that's why he was the Shoe Fetish Slayer. Now, how about a killer who is truly prolific? Number 27, Kentucky. Population 4.5 million. Homicide rate 8.3. The proud state of Kentucky can boast 212 serial killings from 1992 to 2019, and one of its most prolific killers was a hospital orderly, Donald Harvey, another classic angel of death, who ended the lives of anywhere from 37 to 87 people. He started off easing the pain of his victims, but in the end he was killing his victims for the sheer love of it. He smothered victims with pillows, poisoned them with arsenic, cyanide, and morphine, turned off life support, killed with coat hangers and tainted medicines. Like many others, his life would end with violence. A fellow prisoner beat him to death in his cell. Number 26, Louisiana. Population 4.6 million. Homicide rate 19.8. Louisiana had 344 serial killings from 1992 to 2019, making it one of the most violent states on our roster. In fact, it is the state where you're second most likely to get murdered by a serial killer. Rising to the occasion is the monstrous Ronald Dominique, also known as the Bayou Strangler, who killed over 23 men and boys on a 9-year killing spree from 1997 to 2006. Despite his large number of victims and the sexually sadistic nature of his crimes, the Bayou Strangler isn't well known outside of the state, partly because many of his victims were underprivileged people living on the margins of society, a common kind of victim for serial killers. Number 25, Alabama. Population 5.1 million, homicide rate 14.9. There's plenty of bloodshed in the heart of Dixie, 199 serial killings from 1992 to 2019. One prime example of this is Thomas Weisenhand, a violent man who ended the lives of 4 women over his criminal rampage from 1963 to 1976. From killing a woman during an armed robbery when he was just 16 years old, to a lifetime of beating and shooting women with no remorse, Weisenhunt was sentenced to death in 1977 and finally got the lethal injection in 2010, thanks to the slow wheels of justice, but his crimes are nothing compared to this next monster. Number 24, South Carolina. Population 5.4 million, homicide rate 11.8. This state has known 198 serial killings from 1992 to 2019, but it's never known a killer more infamous than Donald Pee Wee Gaskins, a killer who earned the nickname the Meanest Man. Over the course of his murder spree from 1953 to 1982, he claimed anywhere from 15 to 110 victims, and his killing spree didn't even stop when he was in jail. After being paid to do so, he slipped some C4 plastic explosives into the shoe of fellow inmate Rudolph Tyner, then connected it to a power outlet, killing him. He was executed by electric chair in 1991. While our next killer isn't as prolific, he is somehow even creepier. Number 23, Minnesota. Population 5.7 million. Homicide rate 3.8. Not everyone in Minnesota is so nice, and there are 81 serial killings from 1992 to 2019 to prove it. Most memorable among them is Paul Michael Stefani, also known as the weepy-voiced killer, who claimed 3 victims and tried to claim the lives of 2 more. But the murders themselves aren't what made Stefani famous. After the killings, he would call the police and confess to the murders, while crying and affecting a high-pitched voice. The recordings are still out there if you're brave enough to listen to them. But what about a killer styled after the late great Hannibal Lecter? Number 22, Colorado. Population 5.8 million. Homicide rate 7.2. In the Rockies, no one can hear you scream. There were 161 serial killings from 1992 to 2019, and neatly in the middle sit the life and crimes of Scott Lee Kimball, known to some as Hannibal. He's confirmed to have committed 4 murders with connections to around 21. Kimball was a serial forger and con man who became an FBI informant, and during his tenure as an informant, he decided to also begin his serial killer career. That's how he earned his nickname Hannibal. Unlike Hannibal Lecter, he thankfully didn't eat anyone. The same cannot be said for our next killer. Number 21, Wisconsin. Population 5.9 million. Homicide rate 6. This state had 118 serial killings from 1992 to 2019, but its most infamous killing spree went from 1978 to 1991. We're talking, of course, about the crimes of Jeffrey Dahmer, aka the Milwaukee Cannibal, who mutilated, murdered, violated, and in some cases even ate his victims. As one of the most rightly infamous killers in American history, this nasty customer preyed on gay men of color, the exact kind of people that Milwaukee police wouldn't be looking for. In the end, after being arrested and becoming a morbid celebrity, Dahmer got his just desserts when a fellow inmate, Christopher Scarver, beat him to death in prison. But let's keep this cannibal train rolling. Number 20, Maryland. Population 6.2 million. Homicide rate 11.4. Maryland can also be a sketchy place sometimes, with 213 serial killings from 1992 to 2019 to prove it. But to the best of our research, the only killer who boasts about turning people into burgers is Joe Matheny, who murdered anywhere from 5 to 13 people from 1976 to 1996 before finally getting caught. While like many killers he exaggerated the specifics for better cred in prison, there's no denying that Matheny was a brutal killer. He murdered several women and confessed to attacking homeless people with an axe. Not the kind of guy you'd want to invite to the neighborhood barbecue, especially if he's bringing burgers. Let's move on, we're getting a little queasy here. Number 19, Missouri. Population 6.2 million. Homicide rate 12.8. Missouri had 350 serial killings from 1992 to 2019. One of our highest numbers on the list so far. One of the state's most notorious killers is Charles Ray Hatcher, believed to have murdered 16 people over the course of his criminal career from 1969 to 1982. He was another killer who used lying and deception for his own gain, feigning mental illness to lessen his charges. But he's nothing compared to this next monster on our roundup. Number 18, Indiana. Population 6.9 million. Homicide rate 8.4. Indiana had 349 serial killings from 1992 to 2019, meaning it was one murder off from matching Missouri's freak. The most infamous of all of Indiana's killers is Herb Baumeister, an unassuming man who murdered 11 to 24 or more men from 1980 to 1995, picking his victims up mainly from gay bars. He lived a double life as his body count rose, being involved in two different series of killings, the I-70 stranglings and the Fox Hollow Farm murders. Baumeister killed himself after finding out a warrant was out for his arrest, so our knowledge of why he committed his crimes ends there. He's just as mysterious as our next killer. Number 17, Massachusetts. Population 7 million. Homicide rate 2.5. Talk about mass murder. The state had 200 serial killings from 1992 to 2019, and one of the most nightmarish among them was the work of killer, necrophile, and thief Alfred Gaynor, who claimed the lives of 9 victims between 1995 and 1998. The one commonality is that Gaynor liked to get up close and personal with his victims. He beat and strangled the unfortunate women who fell into his grasp. And what happened after, well, that's probably not best to think about. Let's head away from the sea and into the mountains. Number 16, Tennessee. Population 7.1 million. Homicide rate 11. This state saw an upsetting 208 serial killings from 1992 to 2019. And among these is the singularly weird Paul Dennis Reed, also known as the fast food killer, who claimed 7 victims over his killing spree from February to April 1997. Paul had 3 things: an incredibly thick neck, country music ambitions, and homicidal urges. When he couldn't hack it as a musician in Nashville, he decided to make a little extra money robbing fast food places, including a McDonald's, a Baskin-Robbins, and a Captain D's, murdering several people along the way. But for our next killer, murder wasn't a side effect, it was the goal. Number 15, Arizona. Population 7.4 million. Homicide rate 9. Arizona saw 188 serial killings from 1992 to 2019, but 2005 to 2006 were particularly bad for the people in the state. Around this time, the despicable Mark Goudreau, aka the Baseline Killer, was claiming 9 victims, in addition to the rest of his insane crime spree that resulted in 76 total convictions. While Goudreau is the dubious star of this entry, a duo of other killers, also known as the serial shooters, Dale Hausner and Samuel John Dietman, were also at large, killing 8 people between them. But these 3 killers combined didn't have the body count of our next killer. Number 14, Washington. Population 7.8 million. Homicide rate 5.4. Washington had 396 serial killings from 1992 to 2019. Because the state seems to have a strange pull over serial killers. Take Gary Ridgway, the Green River Killer, the second most prolific serial killer by confirmed victims in American history, having murdered 49 to 90 plus women from 1982 to 1998. though it is possible he was killing as late as 2001. Ridgway strangled his victims, most commonly sex workers or runaways, before dumping their bodies. He would sometimes show his victims a photo of his son in his wallet in order to put them at ease before murdering them. And we got bad news, the next is almost as murderous. Number 13, Virginia, population 8.7 million, homicide rate 7.8. The Commonwealth of Virginia was host to 272 serial killings from 1992 to 2019. But just before that, Alfredo Rolando Prieto was on the prowl, claiming 9 victims from 1988 to 1990. Like a lot of murderers, he met his demise at the business end of lethal injection. But is it worse to kill for pleasure or business? Number 12, New Jersey, population 9.3 million, homicide rate 3.8. Tony Soprano's stomping ground experienced 232 serial killings from 1992 to 2019, so it only makes sense that this entry is a supposed mob hitman, Richard Kuklinski, also known as the Iceman because of his technique of freezing victims to hide their time of death. He was confirmed to have killed at least 5 people, but claimed to have killed dozens more before he was arrested in 1986. Kuklinski was also a pathological liar who seemed very invested in bolstering his own legacy as New Jersey's ultimate badass, so the specific number he claims should be taken with a pinch of salt. Our next killer, on the other hand, was the real deal. Number 11, Michigan, population 10 million, homicide rate 8.6. Michigan had 425 serial killings from 1992 to 2019, the highest number so far, and their most horrific serial killer was Carl Eugene Watts, also known as the Sunday Morning Slasher, who claimed from 14 to as many as potentially 100-plus victims. From 1974 to 1982, Carl began habitually bludgeoning, strangling, stabbing, and even drowning female victims, which soon became an all-consuming addiction. In the end, he would die of prostate cancer in prison. Hey, all this horror is making us hungry. Anyone want Taco Bell? Number 10, North Carolina, population 11 million, homicide rate 9.2. North Carolina had 295 serial killings from 1992 to 2019, and Henry Louis Wallace, also known as the Taco Bell Strangler, was one of the most despicable. He tormented and murdered 11 black women of low socioeconomic status, taking advantage of the police's slow response time and tackling his criminal rampage. This allowed him to claim more victims from 1990 to 1994, leading to substantial criticism of how the investigation was conducted by the Charlotte police. In either case, what happened to Wallace's victims is nothing but an awful tragedy. Now let's look into a certain devil who went down to our next state. Number 9, Georgia, population 11 million, homicide rate 11.3. Keeping up with our trend of escalating violence, Georgia had 409 serial killings from 1992 to 2019. And from 1979 to 1981, it's believed that Wayne Williams, also known simply as the Atlanta Monster, slayed from 2 to 30 victims, many of them children. Williams had a variety of modus operandi, from shooting to beating to strangling, and in all cases he displayed extraordinary cruelty. He even made his way into the second season of Mindhunter, which carries a certain degree of serial killer prestige. Number 8, Ohio, population 11.8 million, homicide rate 8.5. Ohio had 505 serial killings from 1992 to 2019, but from 2007 to 2009, the most notorious killer in Ohio was the Cleveland Strangler, Anthony Sowell, who murdered 11 to 14 black women, all but one of which were mothers. He was eventually caught and sentenced to death, but terminal illness took him before the metaphorical hangman could. Our next diabolical killer wasn't so lucky. Number 7, Illinois, population 12.5 million, homicide rate 10.9. We're getting into the really heavy hitters now. Illinois gave us 680 serial killings from 1992 to 2019, but none were more repulsive than the killings that took place between 1972 and 1978. We're talking about John Wayne Gacy, the killer clown, whose murderous rampage claimed the lives of 33 or more boys and young men, whose bodies mainly ended up wedged into the crawlspace below Gacy's ranch-style house. Why do some people call him the killer clown? Because he sometimes performed as Pogo the Clown at local events. But Gacy isn't the only killer who tried to cozy up with children. Number 6, Pennsylvania, population 13 million, homicide rate 8.9. Pennsylvania had 462 serial killings from 1992 to 2019, but we can't think of any more disturbing than Harrison Graham, a mentally disabled drug user who murdered 7 women from 1986 to 1987. When not entertaining the local kids with his beloved Cookie Monster doll, he was strangling women to death during sex and then desecrating their corpses. He was only caught when his neighbors detected an incredibly foul smell emanating from Graham's apartment, where he was storing remains. He might have killed many more if he had the same body disposal habits of our next killer. Number 5. New York. Population 20 million. Homicide rate 4.5. New York had recorded 677 serial killings from 1992 to 2019, and one of its most gruesome and depraved killers was Joel Rifkin, also known as Joel the Ripper, who killed 9 to 17 women from 1989 to 1993. He was no criminal mastermind, but due to the way that he thoroughly dismembered and destroyed the bodies of his victims, he was able to skirt past the law. Number 4. Florida. Population 22.6 million. Homicide rate 7.2. Here we enter the top 5 states where you're most likely to be killed by a serial killer. Florida accounts for 933 serial killings from 1992 to 2019. But its most infamous killer was executed back in 1989, Theodore Ted Bundy, one of the most sadistic killers in United States history. He murdered 20 to 36 or more women, often returning to their bodies to perform further indignities. Bundy's charm was his greatest weapon, his ability to manipulate himself into the lives of his targets, often winning their sympathies by faking disability. Their kindness would be rewarded with brutal murder. But is everything bigger in the next state, including body counts? Number 3. Texas. Population 30.5 million. Homicide rate 7.6. Texas racked up 984 serial killings from 1992 to 2019, and the state's most notorious real killer puts even some of cinema's scariest killers to shame. Dean Corll, also known as the Candyman, claimed 28 or more victims from 1970 to 1973. He got his Willy Wonka nickname for his habit of handing out free candy to local children when he and his accomplices weren't brutally murdering them. Corll and his 2 teenage minions lured victims to Corll's various properties where they would be tortured and humiliated before eventually being murdered. The killing spree only ended when Corll was killed by one of his own accomplices. Number 2. California. Population 39 million. Homicide rate 5.9. Thanks to its truly massive population, California accounts for 1,777 serial killings from 1992 to 2019, the most of anywhere in the U.S. It also has a truly disturbing miracle: the most prolific serial killer in American history by confirmed murders. Samuel Little committed anywhere from 60 to 93 murders from 1970 to at least 2005, though the police have not ruled out those murders starting earlier or later. Little committed his brutal killings, mainly stranglings of women of color, across an alleged 19 different states, often picked up for petty crimes, but never for his truly mind-boggling number of murders. And if we're lucky, Little's record of atrocities will never be broken. And while we counted down these from lowest population to the highest, we saved one state for you where you are statistically most likely to be murdered by a serial killer. And that is, drumroll please, number 1, Alaska. Population 700,000. Homicide rate 10.2. Alaska doesn't have the highest population, but it does have the dubious distinction of being the one where you're most likely to be killed by a serial killer. From 1992 to 2019, the state accounted for 64 serial killings, which means that Alaskans during that time period had a 7 in 100,000 chance of becoming a serial killer victim. That's higher than the national homicide rate and about the same chances as dying from a fall, like off a ladder or down the stairs. The worst serial killer in Alaskan history is Robert Hansen, aka the Butcher Baker, a truly monstrous killer who claimed 17 to 37 victims during his 11-year killing spree from 1971 to 1983. This man's Anchorage atrocities were something straight out of a movie. He sometimes took his young female victims out to the wilderness and hunted them with a rifle. Even on this list of depraved monsters, Hansen's human hunting habits still somehow takes the cake. Now check out worse serial killers that cops never caught. Or watch this instead.